Dear students, today we are going to discuss about public-private partnerships. Public-private partnership is one of the important area in any administration. We are also witnessing various public-private partnership projects, programs in the country. Public-private partnerships are relationships between governing institutions and private or voluntary entities. They allocate the burdens of providing resources and taking risks in the provision of public goods and services. They also allocate the rewards to be gained from the provision of these goods and services. PPPs have proved to be most popular as ways of providing the public with highly complex services or with services that require substantial capital investment. However, far from being limited business ventures, they are found in education, health, transport, technology and other policy sectors. Globalization has spanned a new era of technological revolution. This has paved the way for new ways of collaboration among various governmental institutions at the local, regional, state, central and international levels. The inauguration of the World Trade Organization is a case in this point. Not all partnerships come under the very specific understanding we have about the PPs in work. They differ from one country to other depending upon how they formulate their domestic policies. However, there is unanimous view that PPPs produce the kind of results that have not been witnessed earlier to the period of new public management early of the 1980s. Public administration has transformed into more business type structures and management practices in the last century. These transformations can be dubbed as mere new managerial factors embedded into government and the rise of new management paradigm. The most important changes in modern public administration have been the emergence of horizontal network relationship and the introduction of information and communication technologies. These two developments have profoundly impacted structures and management in government. There are many factors that led to evolution and growth of PPPs in various sectors of governance worldwide. The first being that of automation of organizations in the pursuit of efficiency. The second factor is technology. The massive increase in connectivity created by the World Wide Web, that is WWW, is one of that. The third is scale and complexity. Some projects are so big that they can only be undertaken by the collaborative ventures. Theoretical discussions of PPPs suggest that each actor will provide a particular resource or ability. Those in favor of PPPs suggest that they combine the strengths and the private and public sectors. In this view, PPPs bring together the political access and long-term stability found in the public sector with the entrepreneurial creativity and ability to raise capital found in the private sector. Public administration has transformed into more business type structures and management practices in the last century. These transformations can be dubbed as mere new managerial factors embedded into government and the rise of management paradigm. The most important changes in modern public administration have been the emergence of horizontal network relationship and the introduction of information and communication technologies. These two developments have profoundly impacted structures and management in government. There is a trend towards outsourcing public services to private companies, for example, by forming public-private partnerships. But responsibility for determining entitlements and making other administrative decisions requiring a deep understanding of complex legislation and regulations cannot be outsourced unless there is some way to assure the personnel of the private company will correctly apply the law. Legal knowledge based systems provide a way to achieve this. The public agency retains control over the development of administrative policy by creating regulations, interpreting legislation and modeling these regulations in the knowledge base of LKBS. Provide an auditing trail enabling the agency to review decisions made by the private partner. Performance can be precisely monitored. New distribution channels for public services become feasible. Definitions of public-private partnerships. Public-private partnership has become a favorite tool for providing public services in both developed and developing countries. Public-private partnerships are generally recognized as a long-term cooperative institutional arrangements between public and private actors to achieve various purposes. There is no accepted definition of PPPs, and the definitions are derived from different contexts and represent different points of view. World Bank defines PPP as a long-term contract between a private party and a government entity for providing a public asset or service in which the private party bears significant risk and management responsibility, and remuneration is linked to performance. International Monetary Fund, it says, an arrangement where the private sector supplies assets and services that traditionally have been provided by the government. In addition to private execution and financing of public investment, PPPs have two other important characteristics. There is an emphasis on service provision as well as the investment by the private sector, and significant risk is transferred from the government to the private sector. Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, that is what we call OECD, it defines PPP as an agreement between the government and one or more private partners, which may include operators and financiers, according to which the private partners deliver a service to the service delivery objectives of the government, or aligned with the profit objective of the private partners, and the effectiveness of the alignment depends on a sufficient transfer of risk to the private partners. Canadian government says a cooperative venture between the public and private sector built on the expertise of each partner that best meets clearly defined public needs through the appropriate allocation of resources, risks and rewards. A definition from Australia explains that partnerships between the public sector and the private sector for the purpose of designing, planning, financing, constructing and or operating projects that would traditionally be regarded as falling within the remit of the public sector. Standard & Poor says any medium to long-term relationship between the public and private sectors involving the sharing of risks and rewards of multi-sector skills, expertise and finance to deliver desired policy outcomes. Atomization of organizations. The process of globalization resulted in the atomization of organizations, both public and private. Business have spread wide and far, and there is no alternative to collaboration. In the public sector, cost is just as much of an issue. With increasing demand for public services and limited acceptance of tax, Western countries want their public sector borrowing rate to get far lesser. Liability factor become one of the foremost considerations in their public policy formulation. Over the last 3 decades, there has been an explosion of private finance initiative, that is what we call PFI, deals to fund capital growth in areas dealing with the public welfare. Another push towards atomization of public sector agencies was due to the inevitable rise of brands. Strong brands concentrate on a specific idea and make every effort to build on that idea in the minds of the public at large. Technology as the driver. The second big driver for PPPs is technology. Now that there is every possibility to digitalize all kinds of data and send it remotely to someone else, it is easy to collaborate with people and organizations anywhere in the world. The new connectivity has radically altered the economics of collaborative working everywhere, even to the extent of organizing parents' meeting in the evenings. Students now work with tutors living thousands of miles away. Health systems have become global to the extent that patients in some remote parts of the world get Medicare from surgeons and experts from across the world in a matter of seconds. Foremost, technology vendors have created such a big space for marketing e-governance, e-government practices across the world that no country can ill afford the applications that serve large masses of its population. The ability to connect with any part of the world certainly increases the potential for collaborative working. However, it does not confer an automatic ability to collaborate well. Individuals and organizations are suddenly making connections with people from entirely different cultures and backgrounds, and with organizations that differ from their own in shape, size, outlook, way of working, and quite possibly in hemisphere. There may be a lot of creative possibilities in PPPs, but there are things which are more complicated than them. Monopoly considerations. The third drive behind the growth of partnerships is the concentration of power in some industries in the hands of a few players. Some contracts like oil exploration, IT projects, and infrastructure efforts are so huge that they tend to be dominated by a handful of firms with the capacity to deal with them. Partnerships are essential, but a few IT and financial institutions hold a monopoly over government policies that eventually result in huge costs for the public. Technology vendors hold the monopoly of providing the government with software applications that aim at effective delivery of public services at the cost of public exchequer. This is true in the case of developing nations like India and China. Potential abuse of monopoly power, collusion and price fixing are all aspects that haunt PPPs. The oil industry in particular holds useful lessons for collaborative partnerships everywhere. People are always a key ingredient to any successful work enterprise, whether in the private or the public sector. In both cases, people who maintain their skills, knowledge and abilities to meet the changing requirements of the global marketplace as well as those of the fields of governance place a nation an advantage, participate most successfully in the fast changing world and national scene. Constantly updated education and training programs are the best assurances that any citizen who has the desire to improve will be able to participate with increasing capacities in the opportunities that this changing situation can provide. Public-private partnerships involve private sector supply of infrastructure assets and services that have traditionally been provided by a government. An infusion of private capital and management can ease fiscal constraints on infrastructure investment and increase efficiency. Reflecting these advantages, PPPs are taking off around the world. There are well established programs in a number of countries including Chile, Ireland, Mexico and the United Kingdom, and less developed programs are a good deal of interest in many others. However, it cannot be taken for granted that PPPs are more efficient than public investment and government supply of services. Globally, there are 5 types of organizational collaborations: private sector and alliances and joint ventures, public sector joint working, public-private partnerships, third sector coalitions, self-organizing collaborations. Since the focus of this lesson is on public-private partnerships, we present here a brief understanding of various PPP models in vogue across the world. Public-private partnerships are a relatively new phenomenon. In the 1970s, the UK government was in charge of vast range of public services from utilities to buses and railways, while local authorities were almost solely responsible for schools, social services, refuse collection and council housing. Now the picture has changed radically, with private and voluntary organizations taking on significant responsibility for delivering a wide range of public services. In the early years, PPPs focused mainly on reducing the public sector borrowing requirement, finding ways to keep major capital costs of balance sheet. In 1992, the UK government introduced PFI, a structured program to encourage private investment in public sector projects. Since then, over 700 projects have been signed with over 50 billion pounds. For a long time, PPPs were greeted with skepticism on both the right and the left of economic thought. In recent years, the focus has shifted from reducing public borrowing and government capital spending to achieving increased efficiency and value for money in the delivery of public services. In this form, PPPs aim at using the expertise of the private sector to transform the operations of public sector organizations through a transfer of the knowledge across the partnerships. Because of the huge diversity of the phenomenon, it is almost impossible to take stock of the results of PPPs as a whole in regard to the better governance. On the one hand, partnerships are able to bring real advantages such as economics of scale in the provision of service and activities, the ability to maximize complementary competences and provide opportunities for mutual learning between partners. On the other hand, PPP brings much fragmentation of structures and processes, leading to a blurring of responsibilities and of accountability. Therefore, employees fear losing their jobs or perks, and service users or citizens may fear becoming objects of profit making rather than recipients of the public services. Ultimately, PPPs can produce the best as well as the worst outcomes, depending on the configuration of factors involved in each of them. Generally speaking, PPPs should pay more attention to public governance issues. PPP offers a favorable framework well adapted to contemporary needs in terms of public policy. It facilitates innovation and experimentation. By definition, it encourages the sharing of responsibility. It imposes increased transparency in the management of services through contractual negotiations and the process of drawing up specifications. It may give marginalized groups kept on the fringe of representative institutions, foreigners, women, young people, especially in the inner city, access to negotiations and a certain legitimacy. However, in every instance, PPPs take shape through the actions of the agents involved with their personal ethics, their varying capacity for taking opportunities, their ulterior motives, their corporate or community culture, and the rational expectations they inspire. Role of PPPs. People are always a key ingredient to any successful work enterprise, whether in the private or the public sector. In both cases, people who maintain their skills, knowledge and abilities to meet the changing requirements of the global marketplace as well as those of the fields of governance place a nation at advantage to participate most successfully in the fast changing world and national scene. Constantly updated education and training programs are the best assurances that any citizen who has the desire to improve will be able to participate with increasing capacities in the opportunities that this changing situation can provide. In the traditional structure, the role of the private sector is limited to that of a supplier, subcontractor or technical consultant. Consequently, the private partner assumes only a very low level of risk. At the extreme opposite end of the public-private continuum, we find privatization, pure and simple. Here, services provided are treated as private services much in the same vein, for example, as housekeeping. In this arrangement, the level of risk to the private sector is maximized, as is the level of responsibility. The public sector has no role and remains uninvolved except through the provision of a legislative and regulatory framework for the activity in question. Detractors of PPPs often argue that these partnerships represent a form of disguised privatization, a mechanism for the state to divert itself of its traditional role of providing public services. But is this really the case? Does the initiation of PPP style projects truly represent a withdrawal by the state? An analysis of privatization theory yields some interesting answers, while the traditional definition of privatization assumes that it is the ownership of assets that is transferred to the private sector. Demonstrated that the modern concept of privatization can act along three different dimensions of an organization's competitive environment. 1. Ownership, 2. Funding, 3. Modes of control. PPP schemes and modalities. Schemes: build, own, operate, BOO; build, develop, operate, BDO; design, construct, manage, finance, DCMF. Modalities: the private sector designs, builds, owns, develops, operates and manages an asset with no obligation to transfer ownership to the government. These are variants of design, build, finance, operate, DBFO schemes. Schemes: buy, build, operate, BBO; lease, develop, operate, LDO; wrap around addition, WAA. Modalities: the private sector buys or leases an existing asset from the government, renovates, modernizes and or expands it, and then operates the asset again with no obligation to transfer ownership back to the government. Schemes: build, operate, transfer, BOT; build, own, operate, transfer, BOOT; build, rent, own, transfer, BROT; build, lease, operate, transfer, BLOT; build, transfer, operate, BTO. Modalities: the private sector designs and builds an asset, operates it and then transfers it to the government when the operating contract ends or at some other pre-specified time. The private partner may subsequently rent or lease the asset from the government. Opportunities and challenges. The one concept that have been haunting the PPP is the real definition of partnership. At a general level, almost any kind of relationship can be described as a partnership. Nevertheless, PPPs are understood more narrowly as a contractual relationship. Even this narrow definition would mean that the forms of contracting out, those arose along with the marketization and the new public management would count as PPPs. One might say that a PPP is a contractual relationship in which the relevant public and private agencies agree to fairly stable long-term links so as to fulfill a social purpose in a way that also profits the private agency. Substantive partnerships occur when the private agency more or less replaces the public one. Collaborative partnerships occur when both the public and private agencies perform active functions. There has been a great amount of debate on the feasibility and viability of PPPs in developing nations of late. However, the success of such ventures in health sector like the 108 services in the states of Telangana, Andhra Pradesh, Gujarat and Tamil Nadu, and e-citizen services across the major cities in the country of great hope for the PPP modules in citizen friendly governance. Monopoly of technology applications and software is haunting the e-governance plan in India, but things are changing for the better with many a state government adopting the free and open source software mode for the local applications. There are two streams of extremely diverse thoughts on the concept of PPPs in public administrations. At one level, PPPs have been of great help to national governments in administering their constituents at all levels. However, in the Indian context, they have been successful only at the infrastructure level, where the taxpayers' money is invested nominally. The very use of high technology, complex management practices and huge investments have made PPPs a boon for both the developed and developing world in terms of reducing their budget on public infrastructure, but they have had an adverse impact on a whole range of societies like the marginalized, tribal and women in terms of the displacement, employment, rightful livelihood and substantial life. There is quite an opposite argument that favors the PPP mode in all the sectors that deal with the well-being of the public. Transport, health, education, housing, drinking water, sanitation, local livelihood, community and women empowerment are the areas in which the governments are actively collaborating with the private and voluntary sectors in India. There has been a significant improvement in the lives of rural and urban women with the growing culture of self-help groups across the country. However, the questions that need to be answered are the public agencies not fit and efficient enough to deal with these age-old problems? Are the governments effective enough in realizing their policy goals? Are the administrative systems functioning to their full potential? Many such questions remain unanswered in India owing to practical, political and administrative considerations.